Hey guys, if you've been following the channel closely, you know that we, until recently, have had no furniture at all. And right now, I'm sitting on the first tables to arrive. We have a few more tables and chairs arriving in the days to come. Just got a comment from Realist Central on Livestream, having a discussion here on YouNow. Every so often, I post the link to YouNow on my YouTube channel and on Twitter, and anyone can join the conversation, ask me any questions, and talk to me without even paying the $1 to join my Patreon. If I did it as a Patreon exclusive, I'd have very, very few people participating in the conversation in the audience. If anything, it's probably a good way to invite people to get more involved. But yeah, if anyone complains I don't answer questions, I would say back, what are you talking about? I come on live stream and make myself available all kinds of different ways to interact with the audience and answer questions. But no, I don't waste time herding trolls, you might say. So Realist Central asked first a question. He said, what do you think of speciesism? He asked this question in general. And I had to start my answer by saying, look, this is a question I've talked about in the past on my channel, because I have. It's come up a couple different times. I've talked about speciesism, and I've talked about the ways in which I do actually find it a counterproductive and confusing way to present the argument for veganism, in terms of presenting veganism to the non-vegan public, presenting the concept of veganism to your parents or your grandparents. And I often find it hilariously awful when people have public protests where the slogans they're chanting are crafted in terms of speciesism, and I've criticized some specific protests and some specific slogans that way. However, I have a specific footnote there of some importance that once in a while speciesism actually is a useful concept to employ. Just a couple of videos ago on this channel, I was talking about Hinduism and the potential for Hindus to get more involved with vegan activism and how Hindus perceive vegan issues in a culture that valorizes vegetarianism, but at the same time valorizes drinking dairy milk and eating cheese and that kind of thing. And I pointed out that within India, this is an example of speciesism gone amok. They valorize the lives of cows, but cows only. Cows, cattle, Bos indicus as a species, and that doesn't extend to, for example, water buffalo. So water buffalo, the buffalo of India we're talking about here, are a very similar species of bovine. They have somewhat different horns. But I mean, this is, from a human perspective, you say, well, how is it possible that one of these animals is considered sacred and given legal protection, and then another one is exploited by animals, killed for meat, is milked, to produce milk and cheese and so on. From a not from a scientific perspective, but from a layperson's perspective, you say, look, these are just two types of cows. This is really speciesism. This is ridiculous. Where you're attributing something to a difference between species that doesn't make sense. And once in a while, there are discussions like that about pigs versus dogs, where this idea of speciesism is of some utility. Once in a while. But yeah, I do think it's a misleading optic. And then the very next comment from this same guy, who I've never spoken to before on my live stream, Realist Central comments, it is rubbish. So I'm quoting him, quote, it is rubbish, but over 90% of vegans believe we are all equal, humans and animals. So again, equality, sometimes it's a useful concept and sometimes it is not. Normally, when vegans really kind of formally deploy the idea of equality, they then have to follow it up with so many caveats. They have to say, well, I don't believe that a dog should be able to get a driver's license. I don't believe this. I don't believe that. There are a whole bunch of exceptions they have to lay out that they mean equality in only some very limited and specific sense. And if that's the case, then you probably shouldn't be using the word equality at all, right? You have a whole bunch of caveats here and a whole lot of explaining to do after you use this concept. Then it's probably not the concept you should be using. On a deeper level, I do think that a lot of what's going on is really thinking of animal suffering and animal rights in terms of the soul, in terms of the idea that human beings have a soul, animals have a soul, and that therefore they extend certain rights and privileges and consideration to humans, and they should also extend those to animals because animals and humans are, in that respect, equal. Now, that's a very ancient part of European culture, not only in terms of Christianity and Judaism, but even you go back to ancient theories about the soul in Greece and Rome, in pagan Rome and ancient Athens, you get theorizing about that and philosophizing about that. So it's not something new that's just come out of nowhere. A lot of people reason about humans and animals and relations between them in that way. And, I've had many videos here arguing from different angles about the kind of ineluctable contradictions that leads us into as vegan activists, not merely questions of whether or not our rhetoric makes sense, but whether or not we are espousing a philosophy that's actually crazy, that's actually insane. It is impossible to grow wheat without killing animals to grow wheat, and not just insects, but really highly intelligent mammals like groundhogs and ground squirrels and related animals. So if you really do believe that this groundhog has rights equivalent to human rights, if they deserve to have equal rights with us, if you believe it has a soul and therefore is entitled to this kind of consideration for us, then we have to stop farming wheat. And I'm not joking when I say there are vegan activists who've devoted their lives to vegan activism, like Gary Francione. Gary Francione, who pronounces his own name Francione. Gary, it's on tape, you can see video of this, of him really being brought to a standstill by very simple and earnest questions from the audience about this kind of problem. Like, well, if this is your approach, if this is how you view human rights, then how do we deal with the fact that farming wheat matters? We're not going to stop farming wheat as vegans. How do you deal with exterminating cockroaches that are in your basement or maybe in your kitchen or what have you, or exterminating rats and what have you? How do we deal with even the role of a park warden who is surveying and responsible for, many species in a forest, but he may have to do invasive things in terms of keeping, within a national park, keeping the different populations healthy. He may have interventions against specific species that their numbers are breeding out of control, or dealing with a specific outbreak of a disease. Long story short, park wardens do sometimes kill animals. And I'm not just talking about hunting for profit here. I mean, as absurd as it sounds, for the benefit of the forest as a whole, they may decide to kill wolves. They may decide to introduce more wolves to try to control the deer population. They make those kinds of decisions. And that's a situation that is compatible with veganism, but not compatible with this view of one animal, one soul, and is not compatible with the view that animals have rights equal to human beings. You're getting into so many caveats, it becomes ridiculous. You're getting into the caveats of saying animals have human rights except when it's inconvenient for us, right? You want some animals to have some rights some of the time, and then you fall into the trap of the first concept here, speciesism. So now all of a sudden you're arguing that dogs and cats have human rights, or some human rights, but that the groundhogs don't, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see how quickly this really does lead us down a kind of rabbit hole into madness, into impossible contradictions. And yeah, if our opponents are astute, they'll notice those contradictions and they'll debate them with us, or they'll ridicule us for having them. But it's also not just a matter of how we present our arguments. It's a matter of whether or not our beliefs are in fact crazy. So this has been like a good recap video of things that have been discussed in 800 odd videos on this channel from different angles and different elements. Ultimately, my conclusion here is that we treat animals as if they have rights when they are on a national reserve, when they're in a park, when they're in the forest, when they're in the wilderness that's been designated by human beings with laws to be for the animals and for the trees, for that ecosystem to exist and persist and benefit. And then we cease to treat them as having those rights as soon as they step over the dotted line on the map, possibly by no fault of their own, as soon as they go past the fence. So, for example, a bear, when it's inside a national park, should indeed be a protected species. But then as soon as it claws its way through a fence and comes into a dump or comes into a person's home, all of a sudden it doesn't have those rights, and so on. So that's ultimately a territorialization of animal rights. And I've said in many videos, I could give a link below this channel, I do not believe in animal rights as such. I do not use any of those phrases, animal rights, equality, speciesism, to espouse and advance my approach to veganism and the future of this movement.